What?
I can't find that wooden podium.
Where is it? I think it's back there. It's holding up the laptop.
Oh, okay.
I think
Is that
the podium,
is it
the stand that the laptop's on.
is it wooden?
Is it a yeah
Maybe we'll just take that one. Raise it up.
yeah. This will be fine. If it raises up,
Okay.
we was, try, was trying to do that stuff when we had that meeting. So we are in Exodus 40, Exodus chapter 40, and we got a little catch up to do. So Wednesday we'll probably do the other lesson, and Tuesday or Sunday we'll try to do
They're noisy.
maybe two or combine two of them.
Exodus which chapter?
Chapter 40. These experiences. After Moses received all of God's covenant promises and stipulations, wrote them down, and read them to the people, they committed themselves to the Lord and were sealed by the blood of the covenant. The path was now open for them to enjoy peace with God in the only way they understood, through offerings in the house where He dwelt among them. They just needed to build the house and its furniture by God's specifications. Having received God's instructions, Moses was given the two stone tablets inscribed by God's finger. These served as a symbol of God's guarantee of His faithful love and Israel's commitment to Him. But, as so often happens, sin got in the way. While Moses had enveloped While Moses had been enveloped by God's holiness and glory for 40 days, the people grew impatient and urged Aaron to make them a new god. Out of the Egyptian plunder destined for the tabernacle, Aaron made a gold calf and instituted counterfeit worship of Yahweh. God justly threatened to destroy them, but Moses intervened. He withdrew his threat, but not the disastrous consequences of their rebellion. Some 3,000 people died, and God also struck Israel with a plague. Exodus 33 shows how Israel's covenant violation had corrupted their intimacy with God. They were now under His discipline, and He had to keep His distance. Moses became the nation's mediator, using a tent outside the camp. The estrangement between Israel and God contrasted with Moses' intimacy with Him. He talked with God face to face, an idiom that emphasized openness and directness rather than physical vision. The relationship was also described as a friendship. This was further illustrated by the remarkable conversation Moses had with God in 33:12-23, where he glimpsed God's glory but not His face. And 34 constitutes the renewal of the covenant ceremony that began in chapter 19 but was interrupted by the apostasy in 32. Moses' conversation with the Lord concluded in verses 8 and 9 with his plea for God's forgiveness of Israel and their reconciliation, which the Lord accepted. This resulted in the creation of two new identical stone tablets, since Moses had smashed the first two. In addition, the Lord promised to lead Israel personally and to drive out the Canaanites. 35-39 then describe the tabernacle's construction and the priestly garments. Everything was done just as God had commanded Moses. So in here, it has an illustration. It talks about the what we probably know as a. It's not the royal headquarters, but their abbey monks owned the land. Early in the 1600s, William Blake built the first home there. Massive additions came through the years. Queen Victoria made it her royal residence in 1837. We know it as Buckingham Palace. A common sight atop Buckingham Palace is the royal standard. This flag indicates the monarch is in residence, which means they're there. They're residing there. Uh,
Like a Target,
um,
somebody's
kind of, yeah. So I don't know if they do anything with the White House, but the White House is like really, really guarded. But that's where our president resides. That's where they take up home while they're serving the government. And not our president right now. He's still at his golf course majority of the time. It's crazy. But here they're describing the English palace, right? And I think the illustration is the flag. When they say standard, that's the flag that they would refer to back in the day. So our standard these days would be what? The American flag, the red, white, and blue. It's really, really neat, even though I think some people have a problem with it during the school, what would you call them, competitions. They actually recognize it. They go and they play the national anthem at some festivities. I think the tournament now they play the Oklahoma. I don't know why they play Oklahoma as the song to get everybody around to, but we recognize those things because we want to be I don't want to say loyal, but and prideful, but we want to be allegiant to, right? We want to follow something, and the standard that is represented in England is the royal standard, the royal flag, and it allows people to recognize who they're going to follow, who's going to lead them. It says the question it has: why do the British consider it important to fly the royal standard when the monarch is in residence? What purpose does it serve? And what is a visible indicator that you and your family are at home? I was thinking about this question when I was coming to church, because what is an indicator at the Atokney house? Our lights are always on because they do this. I set them up to where they come on at dusk and then they turn off at dawn. So it's automatic. I don't know. Our vehicles, right? A lot of the times, our families, if your main vehicle is there, that means you're there. It means you're home. Back in the day, my family, it'd probably be if the lights were on in the living room, because we'd always turn the lights on. We'd keep the lights on in the back rooms and outside, but if the light was on in the living room, that meant we were home. Somebody was home, and we wouldn't fly a flag or anything like that. But I know that there's when the president does travel. So I don't know about the White House if it's always up or not. But when he travels, they're supposed to do certain things at like bases and at certain areas of the government, like their institutions. When he's there, they'll fly the presidential flag or whatever to let the government know that he's in the area. It might not be specifically there or whatever. And then for the podium that he speaks at, it's the president's entourage is there when it's the presidential seal or the vice presidential seal or other noticeable elements there. So you're gonna know when they're around, right? And why is that important? Well, for us, because we know how much Secret Service protects the president, that it's going to mean either congestion, right? When the president came through town for I think it was his candidacy the first time around, was it Tulsa? He was doing little rallies or whatever. It wasn't a big show like they were making it out to be, but they closed off, I think it was 2 major highways for him to get to the airport. I think it was Route 11 and then 244 right there. That causes a lot of disruption. So for me, if they're going to be in that area, kind of avoid it, because you're going to deal with traffic headaches and whatever. It might be a small little deal, but it's going to back it up for hours. And that's what happened. Made traffic slow in that area for, I think it was like 3 hours. It's just not something I want to personally, encounter. But it does mean that they're there, right? And that gives you some type of confidence that your leaders are aware or interacting with your region, and that's a good feeling, right? So when the monarch is in residence, it gives you a feeling that, hey, maybe we can actually go talk to them, or we know that they're there. It gives you a little bit of comfort, right? Knowing that they're there. And that's what God recognized with his people, is that, they are acting out. They built built an altar to another thing, right? Trying to substitute for God. And he was going to deal with that, but he seen the need for him to be amongst his people, to show that love, because what they were longing was for him to be around. That's what the bull represented to them, was that they could see it, they could feel it, they could touch it, right? They didn't quite understand that concept of that spiritual need, right? They were substituting that spiritual need for something physical, and it didn't work. And so he recognized that, and that's why he wanted to build that's why he instructed his people to build the tabernacle, so that he could enjoy a place amongst them. And soon, that's not going to be enough. We just can't be satisfied in that. And so later on, what he's laying out here is the temple inside our bodies, where God is going to reside, because of what he's going to do with Jesus, with his son. Because we couldn't live continually to do the offerings, because then it became a process instead of an actual, what would you call it? It became an excuse almost, instead of actually trying to do better. It's like, oh, we could take care of this, and get the birds around, get the sheep around, or whatever, and we can do this, and then we have to be able to pay for it. That's the way people were thinking, and that's not the way he wanted people to live. And so he sent his son to accomplish what we couldn't accomplish ourselves, so that he could literally reside with us with the Holy Spirit, because he needed to be around, because that's what we longed for. So beginning in, let's see, I think it's verse 16. It says, so the tabernacle was set up on the first day of the first month of the second year. When Moses set up the tabernacle, he put the bases in place, erected the frames, inserted the crossbars, and set up the posts. Then he spread the tent over the tabernacle and put the covering over the tent as the Lord commanded him. 20. He took the tablets of the covenant and placed them in the ark, attached the poles to the ark, and put the atonement cover over it. Then he brought the ark into the tabernacle and hung the shielding curtain and shielded the ark of the covenant law as the Lord had commanded him. And it goes on to describe what all the other stuff that went on. I think it's important, so we're going to read it, but what the author wants us to recognize, or to skip ahead, it is to the end. But we'll read over the whole part here. It says, Moses placed the table in the tent of meeting on the north side of the tabernacle outside the curtain, and set out the bread on it before the Lord as the Lord commanded him. He placed the lampstand in the tent of the meeting opposite the table on the south of the south side of the tabernacle, and set up the lamps before the Lord as the Lord commanded him. Moses placed the gold altar in the tent of meeting in front of the curtain, and burned fragrant incense on it as the Lord commanded him. Then he put up the curtain at the entrance to the tabernacle. He set the altar of burnt offering near the entrance to the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, and offered on burnt offerings and grain offerings as the Lord commanded him. He placed a basin between the tent of meeting and the altar and put water in it for washing. And Moses and Aaron and his sons used it to wash their hands and feet. They washed it whenever they entered the tent of meeting or approached the altar as the Lord commanded Moses. Then Moses set up the courtyard around the tabernacle and altar and put up the curtain at the entrance to the courtyard. And so Moses finished the work. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. In all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and the fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the Israelites during all their travels. So we see here setting up the tabernacle is really detailed, right? And there wasn't anything out of place because that's what God had commanded Moses. Now, why didn't he instruct everybody? Because they didn't listen. So it wasn't, they weren't holy enough. No, not that they weren't holy enough. They had demonstrated that they may not be able to serve him perfectly. And so Moses, carrying it out, did everything the way God had instituted. Now, how does this apply to life? How does this apply to current day situations? We couldn't take on that perfect sacrifice ourselves, so he had to send somebody to do it for us, right? We couldn't live that perfect life, so he had to show us how it could be done. And that was through the life of Jesus Christ. And that's the word turned into flesh of what the preachers talk about, of what God is trying to show us here, the setting up the new covenant that we live under now today, right? What the basis of it was back then, right? And so to be able to serve, to be able to worship God, to be able to have that relationship with them, they had to go through the tabernacle. They had to actually go through the priest even. We didn't read over that part, but they had to wear special clothes. They had to do protocol and all that. And that's what was getting in the way of what today is church, right? Anybody can come to God now. The way that is handled now, Jesus changed that part. He didn't come to destroy the law. He didn't say to do away with it. He said it's more direct. It's between you and God now, because he came and built the temple. Yeah, he substituted for that what's being built here, right? And so there's no barrier now. That's why it's so significant when the cloth was torn. Nobody went up there and tore it because they wouldn't be able to, but that's what it meant. Is that barrier now you can go directly to him because Jesus paid for that. That's what the offerings meant. That's when it says the setup of everything. Yeah, you had to wash. There were stages to be able to go and communicate with him, right? And you couldn't do it. The Levites had to do it for you. But to carry all that out, there was a process. And there had to be a process for us to be able to go directly to God. And that process was completed with Jesus. Living that perfect life, right? Moses, he was the closest thing to perfect then. But he followed all of God's instructions, right? And in doing so, he allowed for everybody else to be able to have that relationship. That's what Jesus represents today, is that he lived that perfect life. And that's really hard for our people to understand because all we know is ourselves. and we go back to this to the tabernacle, the way it was set up. All they knew was themselves. They couldn't understand what it meant to build this, to listen to him, to carry out his instructions. So there had to be one person that was selected to do that, and that happened to be Moses, who had that deep conversation with him, who had the motivation to carry out exactly what he said, right? And even to today, it doesn't mean that because we have lived that imperfect life that we're not capable of that. That's all changed. We can be new. We can strive to live that perfect life because everything was been washed clean. And that's what it means to be new, right? When you have that salvation experience, that's what it means to be changed. You don't have to pay attention to your old ways. You don't have to carry on that old stuff, right? You can take on new things. You can be a new person. You can change your ways. That's a native phrase, right? You don't know how to change. You don't know all that stuff. Well, yeah, we got old ways, but there are also new ways that God is trying to teach us. He's putting us in new situations to be able to help, to be able to serve him. And so that's what that, even to today, setting up the tabernacle, it was important because it's going to lay that foundation for what we're going to be able to recognize in Jesus Christ. It's passed to us, but for them looking ahead, they had a way to be able to accomplish some of these things and become better people, but because they strayed away, right? Immediately, Moses was only gone a couple weeks. Can you imagine how it might be if God hadn't left us the Holy Spirit, where we be today, we probably wouldn't even be existing because there wouldn't be any good, right? When Jesus died and God sent the Holy Spirit to dwell amongst us, right? The early church, all these things are leading up until up to today. It's because he wants that relationship with us. He desires to have that relationship with us, and we desire him to be close. And he's closer now than ever. He's with us right now. Now Jesus is going to return, but God left a part of him to be able to guide us, just like he's instructing Moses to do all this stuff, right? He didn't leave us without instruction. When he came and he taught the disciples, right, and he was ministering to the thousands, probably tens of thousands of people back then, he was telling us instruction. That's why we have the New Testament Gospels today, is to take those instructions, right? Those parables can be used in most any situation. They're relevant today because they carry on. That instruction is living. His word is living, and that's probably the most powerful part right there, is that he knew what we would need in the future. It's a little bit crazy to think about. So, there's another part here. So when going back to the standard, the flag, right? We can recognize when God's not around. And that's the point in the illustration earlier. So when the king or queen, what is it right now? Is it the queen? Who's in charge right now? I don't even know. Is it king? So when the king's in town, right? They raise a flag. What they recognized then in the tabernacle was the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. And then when Jesus was communicating to them to move to migrate, right? They only did it when he allowed. He communicated to him when he was around, right? And so that's the part that we need to recognize today. What the Bible study author is trying to bring out is you shouldn't move without God. And so when he's there, when he's working, you're going to be able to recognize that. So that's when he says, go. You're going to be able to recognize when he's not around. And when he's not around, you should probably be searching for him or waiting on him. And that's what it means to be patient, to actually wait, right? We don't want to get caught up like the Israelites, and that's a long time. When you think about it, we don't know the exact time of what they're talking about. It could have been 40 days, night and day like us, but their time might have been a little bit different. We don't know exactly the length of time that they literally waited. Because are they talking about 39 days, 40 nights, whatever? It doesn't matter. The point is to wait, because God he's not going to not fulfill his covenant with you. He's not going to forgo his promises to you, right? We have a different mindset when it comes to time. Today, if you ask probably college graduates, I don't know if the mentality's been stemmed a little bit, been what do you call it, hampered, right? But if you ask college graduates today, when do you think you're going to get a job? They would say tomorrow. They would say next week. They would say, immediately, right? If they don't already have jobs lined up. And then you would ask them, well, okay, how long are you going to stick with that job? Well, until another one comes along. The mentality was different back then. They would be searching for jobs. They would be looking for jobs, and they would want to stick with them. See, that whole mentality has shifted today. Our perception of time is different, especially even just a couple decades ago. But we have to try to put ourselves in God's shoes, right? His time, there's no constraint to him. So being patient with him is different than being patient with our toddler who's, playing around with toys, with our teenager who doesn't want to do homework, with our adult child who can't get it together in life and get a job and all this type. Our perception of time is different, and we have to be waiting on him, right? That's what the Israelites got wrong. They were like, well, he's not around, and Moses left us. We need something to worship. Let's build a giant cow, a golden cow. It probably wasn't giant, but it was. That's the point. They were so impatient that they were ready to substitute God for just about anything. They had nice stuff that they deal. How impatient are we sometimes that we are willing to forego God for something that is worldly, is only exists in this realm right here, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that later on, but that's something that's I thought it was a really good lesson. Again, all these lessons are really good, and we need to get
You also see though, nephew, like not having a relationship with someone, a leader. They were looking for somebody to lead them.
Mhm.
Moses was leading them, and they believed that God was telling Moses what to do. They were seeing what was going on, how God was using him, but yet they didn't know what to do when no one was around.
Yep.
And that's just like kids today. They don't know what to do with themselves when nobody else is around. So having that relationship and having to lean upon the one that's leading us.
Yep.
And make sure it's the right one that's leading you.
Yep.
Or you're going to be making calves or goats or.
That's why when the church started and they said well, when they were setting up the church and the way church should be run even to today, what is really apparent in government is the succession line of leadership. But your leaders, what is left out in a lot of that discussion is that God. When the people didn't see Moses, right? They should have been waiting on God, and that's the point the author is making. They should have been waiting on God. They should have been meditating. They should have been praying. They should have been fasting. Whatever they were instructed to do before then, but they just immediately forgot and said, "Well, we need a substitute." They didn't have that discipline, and that's why he disciplined. That's why he gave them the tabernacle to institute all these rules, because they needed something then and now, and it wasn't time for that yet. So the discipline comes from truly knowing your Lord. And yes, there are other good people that are going to help influence what you do in life. Teachers, coaches, bosses, supervisors. And when those people aren't around, what do we default back to? And that's the point the author was making. Don't get caught up in the world. Don't get caught up in fleshly desires. And that's like what we was talking about. I was asked a really good question I'm going to talk about the sermon about. Unfortunately, it won't be online. Stay tuned. No. It's too cold in here. We need to move to the back because our heater something's wrong with the heater, but it's been cold these past couple of weeks, and so we can't get it cold. We can't get it warm enough in here. So, but we'll have it again at some point. I might redo it online or something. But it's good to have those succession, but ultimately, what you're talking about, yes, they need to be godly people in your life to be able to help support you, and that's what Moses was to the people. But they're not always going to be around. So you need to rely on God. And what he's left us today, and that's what the author was referring to, was the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit. You need to make sure that you're in church. You need to make sure you're in Sunday school and in Wednesday night Bible study and in church groups, and you're around your church, your Christian friends. Because when it gets tough, who are you going to fall back to? You may not have anybody, just like the Israelites. But God is here. And if you had that salvation experience, you have the Holy Spirit. You could talk to him. You could pray to him. You could seek him out. And that might be in a different church. That might be in a different surrounding. That might be in a different community, right? You're going to know. That's the point when he was talking about the standard. You're going to know when God is there, because you're going to be able to recognize him. And that's what it continually, that discipline will help you understand, is that you can go to God. You can go to God. There's going to be people to help you, but you're not always going to have them around. It's nice. It's comforting. And that's what the Israelites needed at the moment. That's why he built the tabernacle. But at the end of the day, you just need him. You need to have that relationship. And so that's what Jesus was talking about when he said, I didn't come to destroy all that. I come to give a new perspective on it. Love God and love others. That's in everything. Those two commandments fill everything else. And so good comment. Good. Brother Ken, would you close us out for Sunday school, and we'll move to the back and get everything started for then?